Hello and welcome. My name is Carsten Lützen. I'm an agile coach and facilitator. Today I will talk about Cynefin, which is one of the things I use the most, and it has been part of my toolbox since I attended AgiNext. I think it was in 2017 or something like that, where Dave Snowden, the guy that created Cynefin, gave a talk about it, and it kind of blew my mind and helped me put words to something that I couldn't really articulate before, and that is how and when is it we work in different ways. So Cynefin is this sense-making framework. It's not a categorization framework, and I will just give a very lightweight introduction to it. And there are so many more layers to this. So if you don't know Cynefin, please dive into that rabbit hole. I guarantee that it will change how you view projects and teams and the ways of working. If we are like high up in the helicopter, we have two types of systems. So we have the ordered systems, where there is some kind of ordered systems, where there is some kind of causality, so something happens and something else happens as a response to that, and we cannot necessarily predict it, but we have a pretty good indication of what will happen. And then on the other side, we have the unordered systems. So the unordered system is something else where we don't necessarily have this causality, what happens. And if we then start out by looking at these ordered systems, then down here in this corner, we have what is called clear. I'll just do like this. So we have clear down here. And in clear, that is where, depending on which version you use, it can also be obvious, clear, obvious. There are some more, but anyway, clear. Down here, it's predictable. We know exactly what happens. So if I come into a room, I see that there is a wet patch on the table. I identify it as water. And then I wipe it away. So that means the way that we act in the clear domain is first we sense. So we see that we have the water on the table. Then we categorize that it is water. Categorize, and then we respond by wiping it away. So when we are in the clear domain, we can talk about best practices, because there is a best way of doing things down here. Best practices. And that is also one of my hobby horses. We can only talk about best practices down here. Then in this next domain up here, that is where we have the complicated problems or systems. Complicated. So down here we would have like staying at a conveyor belt and doing the exact same thing and knowing that we would get the same outcome at all points in time, right? Up here in the complicated, that is where we can bring in different experts, and they might come up with different ways of solving it, but the end result will be the same. That's also why we cannot talk about best practices anymore. There isn't one practice that will automatically do better than all the others. So instead, we can talk about good practices, because all our experts will have different ways of solving it, and all of it will lead to good results, right? So this is where a lot of plan-oriented methods really are the star right up here. So how we work with this is, if we go back to the liquid on a surface example, then we see this wet patch on the table, right? So that is the first part. So we, of course, we sense what happened, what the situation is it that we are in, because we're in the complicated, right? We cannot just categorize it. So instead we analyze. So we analyze, and we do that by is it water? Cool, it's water. Then we just wipe it away, or if it's oil, we do something else. So we analyze and then we respond. And what is interesting about this is other good examples here is like classic waterfall projects, or also rocket science, because that's quite well understood. We know the math behind it. We know what we need to do to actually get this working. So these are the ordered systems. When we then go into the other part of this model, then we get into the unordered systems. And over here is the complex systems. And the complex systems, that is an unordered system. And that means that there isn't this causality. So we need to act fundamentally, or at least different, compared to if we're over here. And over here in a complex system, that is working with people, it's IT, it's politics, it's warfare to some extent, parenting, again, working with people, right? Then what we need to do is we need to probe the system first. So in the water example, right, we see that we have some spill on this table. So we probe the system by taking a corner of a paper towel and see if it soaks up or if it smears. And then when we have probed the system, right, then we sense the results. So that is does the paper towel soak up the liquid, or does it just smear it all over? Because that will tell us how we need to respond to that situation. So a good way to act in a complex environment is to do something, make a little experiment, and then figure out, does it change the system in a way that we like? Then we do more of it. If not, then we dampen it again and try to stop it. That's also why we talk about emergent practices. Emergent practices. And the interesting thing is, IT lives here, but a lot of big companies have a tendency of having these big plan-oriented methods that lives in this complicated domain instead. And that is really interesting, because there is a mismatch on how we work. And if we, for instance, look at Scrum, what we do is we put constraints onto our system. So we have a sprint, let's say 2 weeks. We're only focusing on this. So we are removing complexity. We're moving uncertainty from our complex problem, moving it closer to a complicated problem. And that enables us to actually make a plan for 2 weeks. So that's how Scrum works, right? So when we are clever about this, we can use constraints in a good way to reduce complexity and make sure that we focus on the right thing. So in here we have IT, as I said, and product management. And then some of you might have realized that we also have this quadrant down here, and that is the chaotic part. And the chaotic part can be a lot of different things. If we want to do like true innovation, then if we have something up in the complex, we remove constraints, so we get into this loose, wild area, and where we can play around with a lot of stuff. that also means that what we do is we act because we simply need to do something to stay alive or to stay relevant. And then when we have act, we did something. Then we sense what did it do to the system, and then we respond. So in the water on surface or liquid on surface example, that is the maybe a bit stretched equivalent that we have a spill and it's just spreading super fast, right? So we just grab whatever cloth or paper towel that we can, and then we do our best, and then we see did the spill stop? Okay, check, then this is working. If it didn't stop, then we need to try out something else. That also means that when we are down here, we can talk about novel practices. There isn't anything we can really lean upon. It's just that's just how it is. We need to do something right now. And there is an interesting thing here I deliberately did not draw until now, and that is there is this little symbol or glyph that it's called. And this is one of the things I remember from the talk that Dave did. So when we are in the clear, there is a real risk of us resting on our laurels. The world is as we expect it to be, and everything is just trucking along as we expect. And then all of a sudden something unforeseen happens. And then we fall into the chaotic domain. All these we can traverse back and forth, hopefully in a deliberate manner, right? But this one is a one-way. And the problem is that recovery when we're in chaotic is really expensive, because we need to travel all the way back, and not all companies are able to do that. So when we have problems down in the clear, we need to be vigilant that we are not falling into this and get blindsided by something. Just look in history, you've seen it again and again and again, where some market leader was overtaken by something that they did not foresee, that just came in and changed how the world or that industry worked, maybe even overnight. This one, disorder, is interesting in a lot of ways. So when we don't know where we are in which of these domains we are, then we are in the disorder domain. And the interesting part about the disorder domain is, let's imagine that I get into a room and I see a spill on the counter on the table. I don't know how long the spill has been there. I can just see everyone in the room have their own preferred way of dealing with it. Somebody just sees it's water and wipe it away. Somebody sees, oh, maybe we should try out small and then grow from there. So when we don't know where we are in the disorder. And a lot of us have a personal tendency or preference on how to solve problems. My preference is up in the complex. I would like to start small, try something right, and then figure out, did it do what I wanted, and then respond. I know a lot of other people that they would rather sense, analyze, and respond right, because they live more in this, or they like, or this more complicated approach to it. And there's also another thing, that I might perceive something as complex, but that's due to my lack of knowledge about the problem. So imagine that I need to go from here to a specific point, a lighthouse maybe, through a maze. Then if I don't know the maze right, I will try to see if I walk that way, does that get me closer to the lighthouse or not? So I would tackle it by this. But in reality, if I just had a map, then I could easily make a best route through the maze. So when we're talking about working in teams and working with teams and facilitating teams, we are often in the complex environment, because we're working with people, we're working with a lot of uncertainty, and we're often pressured to deliver new stuff. But our stakeholders are often asking for plans. When can we expect this, or when can we expect that? dealing or treating this as a complicated problem. And that's where a lot of this friction and tension can be created in a system. So when we start to talk about, is this a complex problem or a complicated problem? What can we do to go into chaotic, to find this new $1 million idea, for instance, or how can we stabilize our system that is currently in the chaotic into the complex? That is where the really interesting questions are. I'm often asked to help a team in the chaotic go into complex and then maybe venture a bit into complicated, so maturing the ideas, maturing the way of working. So that is a somewhat brief introduction to Cynefin, and I can just encourage you to dive into this rabbit hole of Cynefin because it's just so awesome what it can help us achieve, both in terms of communication and insights into different ways of working. And I'm super curious, if you have also experience with Cynefin, please share how do you introduce it, because it can be a mouthful to get your head around. Yeah. If you have comments, questions, ideas to these videos, please leave a comment or send me a message. That would be awesome. And as always, have a super, super awesome day.